Let us look at the steps they took and draw some lessons from them. In the first place, they set out at the rising of the star. The Magi teach us that we need to set out anew each day, in life as in faith. For faith is not a suit of armor that encases us. Instead, it is a fascinating journey, a constant and restless movement, ever in search of God, always discerning our way forward. Then in Jerusalem, the Magi ask questions. They inquire where the child is to be found. They teach us that we need to question. We need to listen carefully to the questions of our heart and our conscience, for it is there that God often speaks to us. He addresses us more with questions than with answers. We must learn this well. God addresses us more with questions than with answers. Yet let us also be unsettled by the questions of our children and by the doubts, hopes, and desires of the men and women of our time. We need to entertain questions. The Magi then defy Herod. They teach us that we need a courageous faith, one that is unafraid to challenge the sinister logic of power and becomes seeds of justice and fraternity in societies where in our day, modern Herods continue to sow death and slaughter the poor and innocent amid general indifference. Finally, the Magi return by another way. They challenge us to take new paths. Here we see the creativity of the Spirit who always brings out new things. That is also one of the tasks of the Synod we are currently undertaking, to journey together and to listen to one another, so that the Spirit can suggest to us new ways and paths to bring the gospel to the hearts of those who are distant, indifferent, or without hope, yet continue to seek what the Magi found, a great joy. We must always move forward. At the end of the Magi's journey came the climactic moment. Once they arrived at their destination, they fell down and worshiped the child. They worshiped. Let us never forget this. The journey of faith finds renewed strength and fulfillment only when it is made in the presence of God. Only if we recover our taste for adoration will our desire be rekindled. Desire leads to adoration, and adoration renews our desire. For our desire for God can only grow when we place ourselves in His presence. I'm so grateful for these words from Pope Francis, and I want to add just a few thoughts to match them and complement them. In the first place, when the Pope speaks about setting out anew each day, he comments that faith is a constant and restless movement, ever in search of God. And this put me in mind of Augustine's famous comment that our hearts are restless until they find their rest in God. It made me remember that unless we aim our restless hearts at God, we will aim them somewhere else. In my tradition, John Calvin teaches that we will worship something or someone because we are designed to do so. And so it's important to decide that what we will focus on will be God, who is the only one who can satisfy the restlessness with which we are born. Another thought about this reflection pertains to this idea of asking questions, which I love very much. And I'll repeat what was so important to the Pope that he said it twice. We must learn this well. God addresses us more with questions than with answers. I got to thinking about this, that it isn't just important that we listen to the questions from our children and from the men and women around us. I think it's also important that we listen to our own internal questions. Sometimes we have made a decision about something or believe that we know something. We believe that we're so sure that we can put this away and trust that it's settled forever. But I wonder if we are also being called by Pope Francis to question ourselves and to question our answers, the answers that we have come to in the past. Perhaps the Spirit is asking you to rethink something that you thought you had settled before, because He is speaking to you and to me in a new way, with new insights that are possible, that would not have been possible to us before. So this questioning is not just the questioning of other people, but also the questioning of our own hearts and our own conscience. So a third reflection on this reflection is to speak about this idea of having a courageous faith. Pope Francis talks about challenging the sinister logic of power. And I was so struck by this. I was thinking about the prophet Nathan in the Old Testament, who comes to King David and says, "You are the man." He tells a story, and then he lets the king know that the king is the villain in the story. And therefore, he is challenging the sinister logic of David's power. I got to thinking about this, that when Pope Francis talks like this, he really is speaking like an Old Testament prophet. There's something prophetic about the ministry of this Pope. But there's something prophetic about the ministry of all Christians. In the Catholic tradition and in my own tradition, we speak of the threefold office of Jesus Christ as prophet, priest, and king. And by baptism, all of us are anointed with all of these offices, the office of prophet, of priest, and of king. So it isn't just Pope Francis who is serving as a prophet in the world right now. All Christians need to be prophetic in word and deed, out of the kind of courageous faith that Francis describes here. Where are their modern day Herods, and to whom do we need to speak? And do we need to ask ourselves if we are serving as a modern day Herod? These new ways come from asking ourselves new questions. And that connects to the next paragraph where Francis talks about new paths. We must always move forward. There is no forward motion without the humility to ask ourselves new questions, to rethink our old ways, question our answers, and to put ourselves in situations where we speak prophetic truths to ourselves and to others. Finally, one of my favorite parts of this excerpt from Pope Francis is the part where he speaks of bringing the gospel to the hearts of those who are distant, indifferent, or without hope. Their distance is not necessarily from God. They might be distant from the gospel at this time in their lives, but in no way is God distant from them. And I love this focus on what we call in my community evangelism. And I think it has an important part to play in the rhythm that Francis is talking about when he talks about worship. We go to worship to soak up the presence of God, to be equipped then to carry the riches of the church to the world that does not have the riches and does not know that they exist. A definition of evangelism that I have heard before is evangelism is one beggar telling another beggar where to find bread. That's the humility that Francis is talking about. To say Jesus is the bread of life. We in the churches have this bread. Now we must take it to those who do not have it. And this is the time of year when we focus on that kind of outgoing movement of evangelism.